We have Mr. Royce Mullins. He has lived in Pound all his life. He's 65, and he resides at Rough Ridge Farm in Haddonville, section of the south of the mountain. He retired in 2016 from the Nalco Water, is that correct? It's a division of Ecolabs as an industry technological consultant. Technical consultant for the specialty water polymers related to the mining industry. That's a big title.
They don't do that much work.
He says, while my job has allowed me to travel exclusively in North America and all over the world, he lives half a mile from where I was born in Haddonville. And then, of course, he says, what's the saying? There's no place like home. We have Mr. Roderick Mullins. He's originally from Clintwood, and he now lives in Wise. He works with the Wise County School Systems, and he's the instructor of the Wise Central Robotics team. What did you tell me that you guys just won? I think that's really important.
We just won Entrepreneurship Award at the first ever Tennessee Underwater Regional Robotics Championships in Kingsville. We competed against 4 bigger schools with bigger budgets, one from Florida. And then
Appalachia, one story at a time. Roderick will be presenting on his famous great-grandfather, Andrew Jackson, Brandy Jack Mullins. Is that correct? Okay. We also have Mr. Gary Varner with us. He is a Pound native who graduated from Pound High School. He tells entertaining, fun, and sad stories of growing up in Pound. He is a Vietnam veteran. He was an Army aviator. He's married to Tammy Hayes' sister Peggy, so you might be able to get some information about Tammy. I read that from mine.
No Ken to Tim Baldwin.
To who?
Tim.
You can take that up before. But anyway, we welcome all of you to our storytelling. Who'd you say to me? Royce will go first. Okay. And before he gets started, if you haven't signed in, please make sure that you sign in for us so that we know who's here.
So I've lived all my life in the south of the mountain. Lived all my life, well, most of all my life in Haddonfield. And on the 14th day of May, 1892, my great-grandmother, Liddy Haddon, who was the daughter of Lawrence Haddon, Dr. Lawrence Haddon, she was hoeing corn in Haddonfield. A little bit after noon, sometime after 12, 1 o'clock, somewhere there, she was hoeing corn. She was 19 years old, hoeing corn in Haddonfield. And she said she heard the shots ring out on the mountain that morning. She said, what in the world is going on? Well, the Killing Rock Massacre was getting ready to take place. Now, there's a lot of different versions of what happened at the Killing Rock. My version is an eyewitness account of what happened at the Killing Rock, because it is the account of Heenan and Cal Fleming as told to their brother, John Fleming, who was my uncle by marriage, Winford Collins. That was his grandpa. So as a little boy, he told Winford all about what his brothers had told him and what had happened at the Killing Rock. Now, there was bad blood between Doc Taylor and Ira Mullins. And when Doc Taylor became a U.S. Deputy Marshal, he was bound and determined to stop the moonshine trafficking in Wise County. Ira lived over on Elkhorn Creek, but he trafficked liquor through Wise County. So about a year before the shootout at the Killing Rock, they had ambushed Ira right in front of Gladeville at that time, is what they called it, not Wise, Gladeville Courthouse. They ambushed him and his men because he had a wagon full of liquor. Well, there was a big shootout up there. One of the men were killed of Ira's group, but Ira wound up getting away. And so that Ira bound and determined, because of that, he was bound and determined, or the word had got out that he was going to kill Doc Taylor. Also, Heenan Fleming, his wife, was the daughter of Henry Vanover, who was killed, and many said that Ira was an accomplice or was directly responsible for that killing of Henry Vanover, because Henry said that Ira was squatting on his land, and there was some court issue, they were in court over it, that he was squatting on his land, and he was trying to get him removed from his land, and then Henry was killed. Now, it was never proven. Some say Clifton Branham killed him. And Clifton was the last man hung at Wise Courthouse. But it never was proven, but the talk was that Ira had a big thing to do with the killing of Henry Vanover. So you can see how the bad blood was there between Doc Taylor and Ira, and between Heenan Fleming and Ira. Now, Heenan and Cal was 22 years old when that shootout took place, when that killing took place of Killing Rock. He was 22 years old. Heenan was 26. They told their brother that Heenan was never there when the shooting took place. Heenan had taken the horses down the trail so the horses wouldn't give away. They knew they were coming over, bringing liquor over from out of Elkhorn. They were going to bring it over and peddle it. Well, they knew that Ira was coming, so they sighted out the ambush spot. If you've ever been to Killing Rock, you can see what a great ambush site that is, because the road just comes right down in front of that rock, and it sits up on a hill kind of, and it's just perfect cover. On the back side of that rock, it's flat, so you can just lay down and just wait until whoever party came through there, if you wanted to ambush them. They swore that Heenan said, I was never there. He took the horses about a quarter of a mile down the trail toward the Stacy Branch, because they were afraid the horses would start whinnying or would cause a ruckus and would give them away. So they said there were 4 there at the actual killing. They told the brother that Doc Taylor was there, that Henry Adams was there, Cal was there, and my uncle said a swindle man from Dixon County. We don't know that man's name. I wish I did, but they said there was a swindle there at that killing from Dixon County. So that morning, or early afternoon, as the party came down the Old Finn Castle Road, the party consisted of Wilson Mullins, who was walking in front of the wagon. A 2-horse team of 2 horses were pulling the wagon. Wilson Mullins was walking in front of the wagon. Sitting on the buckboard of the wagon was Lorenza Mullins, Ira's wife, and John Chappell was driving a team of horses. Laying in the back, on top of the liquor with hay and stuff over it, was Ira. Now, sometime between that shootout at Gladeville, when one was killed and Ira got away and Doc Taylor confiscated the liquor, Ira had been shot and paralyzed. So he was paralyzed from the waist down. So he was riding in the back of that wagon because he couldn't walk, number one. And number two, it was a good place to kind of camouflage his bounty that he had with him, his goods. Walking behind the wagon was Ira and Lorenza's son, John Harrison Mullins, 14 years old. Beside him was his friend, Greenberry Harris. He was 15 years old. Bringing up the rear was Jane Mullins on horseback, who was Wilson's wife. Well, when they came down in front of that rock, they just started shooting. They killed Wilson Mullins. They killed John Chappell. They killed Lorenza. They killed Ira. They killed John Harrison Mullins, Greenberry Harris. And John Harrison Mullins, their son, took off down the trail. And they shot his suspenders in two. That's how close they come to killing him. They shot his galluses in two as he ran down that trail. Just a fraction of an inch and he would have been dead. Well, the only one that survived, other than that boy who went, their boy, was Jane. And Cal stood up because he knew Jane and told her to run. Now, they were veiled, but he stood up and hollered at her and said, "Get out of here because you're going to be killed if you don't." Well, she recognized his voice and went back and wheeled her horse around and rode back into Kentucky and swore that it was Cal Fleming and Heenan and Doc Taylor, because it made sense, because Doc Taylor and Heenan and Cal ran together. But she swore to Cal's voice as the one told her to run. Well, and this is something I didn't tell when I told the story up at the rock. They threatened to kill Cal right there because he told her to run and kind of give him away because she knew it was Cal. And so they threatened to kill him right there, but they didn't. All right, after the killing, Now, Cal told his brother that he didn't kill anybody, he just shot the horses. Now, this is his brother he's talking to, so you know, I'm just telling you what he told his brother. He said that Doc Taylor, Bad Henry Adams, and the Swindle Man killed all the people. Said he just shot the horses down. But that was what he told his brother. Okay, now I don't know if that's true or not. Cal was mean, but you know, for his brother's sake, maybe it sounded better to tell it that way to his brother. So after that shootout, they kind of stayed in the area and scouted the law. They called scouting out, you know, they were scouting the law to try not to get captured, and they stayed in this area for about a year. My uncle's grandpa, John Clemmy, would tell him about how he would know where they were at and take food to them, so they'd have something to eat. But they skirted the law for about a year until they were cornered out on Mill Creek at a place they call the Battleground. Now, a lot of people think the Battleground is because they used to fight chickens out there. That's not why it's called the Battleground. 22 men surrounded them two boys at the Battleground on Mill Creek. Anybody know where Dewey Witt lives? Out that way? Anyway, it's pretty right in that same area where Dewey Witt lives. So they surrounded them and they shot their way through those 22 men and got away. Well, Heenan was shot in the leg and wanted to give up. And Cal was mean, and Cal said, no sir. He said, I'm not going to let you give up. He said, if you give up, I'll just shoot you dead right here. He said, you're not giving up, so you're either going to go on or I'll kill you right here. Well, you know, nothing else for Heenan to do, you know, go on. So they crossed Pound River and went into Osborne Gap and stayed all night. And stayed all night at a Swindle Man's house in Osborne Gap. And I've always wondered, and my uncle always wondered, was that the same Swindle Man that was involved in the shooting at the Rock? But they stayed all night at a Swindle Man's home and left and went into Marshall's Branch over in Kentucky, where they had some relatives, and Heenan nursed his wound until he was well enough to travel. From there, they traveled into Boggs, West Virginia, which is just outside of Summersville, West Virginia. Little logging camp. I've been right to Boggs. It's just 2 or 3 houses and that's it. It's on Birch River, just outside of Summersville in Webster County, West Virginia. At that time, and actually, I've been to Cal's grave. I've been to his actual grave site at the cemetery in Boggs. But at that time, there was a bounty out for these guys. $700 dead or alive. Well, that sounded pretty good to Ed Hall, Gooseneck John Bramham, and IT Doc Swindle. That sounded pretty good, $700 dead or alive. We think and they intercepted their mail, so they were both married. Remember I told you Heenan's wife was the daughter of Henry Vanover who'd been killed? Well, Cal was married too. Well, they intercepted their mail and found out postmarked where they were at. So they got on a train, Ed Hall and Doc Swindle and Gooseneck John, and went to Bluefield. From Bluefield, they got some horses and they rode in to Boggs. Now, from Bluefield by car to Boggs is about 3.5 hours, so you know it probably took them 2 or 3 days, 4 days or so to ride from Bluefield into Boggs. So in Boggs at that time, there's a little creek runs right down in front of the road, and the old store's tore down. But they showed me the people that lived there showed me the exact side of where the store was. There was a country store that doubled as a post office. And so when they got there, sometime, you know, they went into that post office and inquired about those boys. And they said, yeah, we know them. So they come down every Saturday to check on their mail and to pick up whatever supplies they need from when they were working up at that logging camp. Well, there was a guy in that store who found out they was $700 bounty dead or alive. He said, man, he said, I wish I'd known that. He said, I'd have captured them myself. Ed Hall looked at him, he said, son, said, you West Virginia boys may be tougher than us Virginia boys, said, but they shot their way through 22 of us down there in Virginia, said, you might have got them, and said, you might not. So, come Saturday morning, they'd been there a day or two, come Saturday morning, that guy who's made brag about how he took them himself, rode up the trail to see if they would want to come in. Well, he seen 2 men riding horses coming down the trail. And he stopped and he asked their names. Well, when he asked their names, they pulled their pistols and cocked them and said, who in the blankety blank wants to know who we are? Well, that brave guy said, no, whoa, buddy, said, I'm just in here taking the census. Said, I'm just trying to find out who lives in this area. Said, I don't mean nothing by that. Wasn't too brave, you know, after that them guns pointed at him. And so They went on. Now, some stories say that Ed Hall and John Branham and I.T. Swindle were in another building that set to the side of this store, and that when they went in behind them. Not according to Heenan. Heenan said when they opened the door, there wasn't give up, raise your hands, you're under arrest. He said they just started shooting. They killed Cal dead right in the doorway, shot him down right in the doorway. He never even cleared his gun out of his holster. Shot him down dead right in the doorway. Well, that left Heenan to fight it out with the other three. Well, you know, Heenan done pretty good. You know, you want to know. He shot Ed Hall on the top of the head. Ed had a big wire-brimmed hat. That wire went all the way around that hat. He shot him on the top of the head and caught that wire and unraveled that wire completely off his cap, because that bullet just went right around. There dropped Ed Hall. Well, Heenan thought he killed him. What he done, he knocked him out. He concussed him, you know, and knocked him out, gave him a concussion. So there fell Ed Hall. He said, that one down, two to go. Doc Swindle was hiding behind a potbelly stovepipe that said this happened on January the 14th, 1894. Okay, that's when that shootout took place, January 14th, 1894. Cold, so he was behind that stovepipe. Well, he shot Doc Swindle through that stovepipe in the neck. And old Doc Swindle was bleeding like a stuck pig, and he staggered out and fell in the creek. 2 down. Just 1 to go. That left him and John. Well, he shot John Branham down. And he was standing over John Branham, getting ready to finish him off, and Ed Hall came to from behind and got the drop on him and told him to throw his gun down. Why he didn't shoot him, I don't know, because according to Heenan, they started shooting the minute they didn't say, you know, but he got the drop on him and told him to throw his gun down. Now, Heenan didn't come out of this shootout smelling like a rose. I mean, he shot him up, but he got shot up too. He was shot in the side of the face, knocked every tooth out of one side of his face, and just dislocated his jaw. He was shot, one of the bullets hit the cylinder, the barrel of his gun, and split that barrel down to the cylinder, and then jumped and went in his arm and lodged right under his elbow. My uncle said when he was a 10-year-old boy, he remembered Heenan can't come in from West Virginia, and said there was a big blue bulge right under his elbow where that bullet was. They took it out. And he might have been shot up another place or two, but that's 2 places I know he was shot up. Well, when that bullet split the barrel of that pistol, Heenan just reached over and pulled Cal's pistol out of his holster, because I was laying there dead, and he just kept on shooting. So, hey, Cal's got one there, I'll just get it, keep it going. So, Heenan was shot up pretty bad, John Branham was shot up pretty bad, so they laid down and started cussing one another, see who was going to die first. John said, you'll die before I will. Heenan said, no, said you won't, said you'll die before I will. And they laid there and cussed one another, and guess what? John died. And he's buried up there in an unmarked grave. Now, Cal's mother put up a nice tombstone for him at the Bog Cemetery. I hate the condition of the cemetery, because it's run down and not been kept up, but he's got a nice tombstone that his mother put up for him. But John Branham's in an unmarked grave. Don't know where he's laying up there, but both of them are buried up there in the Bog Cemetery. Well, when Heenan and Ed Hall and I.T. Swindle and all of them shot up, when they got well enough to go, they went back here to Wise. And the thing about it was, when they got back with Heenan, Jane Mullins had been killed. And some say that their brother, not the brother John, not my uncle's grandpa, but another brother had shot Jane and killed her. And so there wasn't no eyewitnesses to prove that Heenan was even there. So he come clear. And he went back took his wife and went back into West Virginia and raised his family and became a law officer in West Virginia, in Webster County. And that's where he's buried, and all his descendants, and he was a law officer up in West Virginia. But, people talk about the OK Corral and how rough it was. There's nothing about the OK Corral that's any more dramatic than what happened up there at Boggs in that shootout. That was pretty dramatic. But there's one story about 22 shots or something about it, that was fired up there. I don't know how many shots was fired. All I know that they were shot up, all of them were shot up, and Cal Fleming lay dead, and so did John Branham. Cal Fleming died, he's 24 years old. Killing Rock, 14th day of May, 1892. 20 months to the day. On January 14th, 1894, Cal Fleming lay dead in Boggs, West Virginia. And he come back and come clear because there wasn't anybody to testify that he was there. And so that's the story of the rock, and that's the story that was told to me by my uncle. And I tend to go that version because this is Hingham Fleming telling it and Cal telling it when he was at the killing. So I'll take their version over any other version that anybody wants to take. So I guess, you know, I mean, I've told this so much that I guess it gets old, but everybody still likes to listen to it. But it's history. It's history. It really is. I can tell you a little story real quickly about little bad John Cox from Dixon County. John Cox, he was a small statured man. He worked for my grandpa out on Rough Ridge Farm, William Sayers, worked out there, helped clear the fields and everything. And John was a little in stature, but he wanted to brag to people. So there would be people come over the mountain. See, back at that time, the way my family made it through the Depression was making liquor. My mother said they would have starved to death if they hadn't made liquor. They would absolutely starve to death. So that's how they got their money. They made liquor and sold it. And when the people would come over from over around Jenkins to buy the liquor, John liked to elaborate and brag about his exploits in life. And he told one tale one time. He said, I was walking the streets of Los Angeles, California. 2 pearl handle 45s on my side. And a beautiful young woman walked up to me and said, "Pardon me, sir." I said, "Aren't you a little bad John Cox from Dixon County?" He said, "Lady, I'm sorry to say that I'm the man." He said, "Well," she said, "I thought that was you. I recognize your picture in the paper, you know." So he would tell stuff like that. And one day he was talking to my grandpa, called him Bill, and he said, and he had 2 fine mules out on the farm out there. My grandpa did. And John said, "Bill," I said, "don't you know somebody's going to come in and steal one of your mules one of these days?" He said, "Well," John said, "you're crazy." He said, "Who's going to steal my mules?" I said, "I'm off the road." And said, "We keep them up." He said, "Who's going to come in here and steal one of my mules?" He said, "Well, I'm telling you, somebody's going to steal one of your mules." Well, about a week later, one of his mules went amiss. And they kind of had an idea who it was. So they picked up some tracks down in Spring Branch and kind of tracked that mule all the way through to where John lived over on Brush Creek in Dixon County. Found that mule tied up behind his house. So my uncle went to the law, and the law wouldn't go. They said, "We'll deputize you to go." I don't know what the deal was on that, but they deputized my grandpa to go to apprehend John for stealing his mule, and Harry McFall went with him. So they go over, and my grandpa stands in front of the door, knocks on the door. He said, "John," said, "this is Bill," said, "I've come to arrest you for stealing one of my mules." And said when he said that, Harry just grabbed him and pulled him out in front of that door, and old John emptied a .38 right through that door. Well, when that happened, they shot in the house and shot one of John's daughters in the shoulder, and just had, just a mess. And they finally, John gave up, and John had to spend 2 years in the penitentiary over that. Nobody knows what happened to little bad John Cox, other than some say he got burned up at a steel place back in the mountain. That's the talk, if somebody burned him up under a steel back in the mountain. And one final story. We got time? Or have I told enough? All right, one final story about, as I was telling you about my grandma. She lived with us for 16 years when I was growing up as a teenager. And as a teenager, you don't pay much attention to old people. They're in the way, and I ain't got time for you. Let me tell you something. If I'd taken the time to talk to her and got information about growing up, she was born in 1889, and got information about living out in the south of the mountain and all the different things she saw through her life, I would be a storyteller. I would be the historian of the south of the mountain, but I'm not. But I will tell you one story she told me, because it was right before she died. Just a few days, and I knew her time was about up, and I just was kicking myself, saying, well, I let it slip by me. I was 23 years old at the time. And I asked her, she was up in the hospital at Wise, Appalachian Regional Hospital, that hospital up there. I said, "Ma, who was the meanest man that you ever knew of out in the south of the mountain?" Well, she never hesitated. She said, "Let me think." She said, "Ed Cox." Just Ed Cox. I said, "Ed Cox." Ed Cox lived out where Wallace Mullins lived, where he lives now out in the south of the mountain. Well, we used to call it the archery range out there, but I always called it the Cox place, but that's where he lived. And he was married to a Sowers. And she had a sister that was really pretty, and Mac Austin, who was an 18-year-old boy, was kind of courting Ed Cox's sister-in-law. Well, Ed Cox didn't like it. And he was an overbearing bully. No, you know, he just run over everybody. Nobody challenged him, you know, he was rough and mean, and he just he was overbearing. So he got him because he was trying to court his sister-in-law, who some say he was struck on her. You know, she was real pretty and everything, and he didn't want anybody fooling with her because he thought maybe he might get her in time, you know. So he got that boy down out the Stormy Gap. Anybody know where the Stormy Gap is out in the, anybody know where Hibbert Tackett lives out south of that? Well, that's Stormy Gap. He got him down out at the Stormy Gap with a bunch of men and slapped his face in a mud hole and ridiculed him in front of a bunch of men and told him we better leave that woman alone. Said he didn't want her fooling, we didn't want him fooling with her. Well, a couple of days later, at the old home place where I was raised, just before you get to Haddonfield, Mac Austin showed up with Enoch Wright. Enoch Wright was his uncle. His mother was Austin, but his daddy was a Wright, but he went by Austin, went by his mother's maiden name. Showed up on the porch with Enoch Wright when he had a 30-30 Winchester. Now they knew that Ed Cox and Paris White and Smith Whitaker had went up on South Fork either to sell some liquor or get some liquor. All about liquor back in them days, you know. And so they sat on that porch waiting for him to come back out of South Fork. My grandmother was 9 years old. She was there. She said they sat on that porch for a long time, an hour or something like that. Said they saw him coming down the road, saw him coming that way. Well, they went up and stood in the road. And Mac Austin had that 30-30 Winchester. Well, they come up to where they were, pulled their horses up. Ed Cox asked him what he wanted. He said, Ed said, get down off that horse. Said, I got a score to settle with you. Ed Cox never blinked an eye. He looked at him, he said, son, he said, you put that rifle down, or when I get off this horse, I'll stomp your ribs together faster than hell can scorch a feather. When he said that, he shot the top of his head off. Shot his brains. My great-grandpa took a shovel and dug a hole on the side of the road and buried Ed Cox's brains. My grandmother stood on the porch and watched him shoot him off that horse and killed him. Now, you know, the way I look at it, Ed Cox pretty nervous man looking down at 30-30 and say something like that. Well, that's the last thing he ever said. And after that happened, and you know, just like when Heenan and Cal scouted out for a year, and nobody ever caught them, you know, until they went up to Boggs. He went over into Kentucky where he had relatives and was arrested for it, never stood trial. He would come back from time to time and visit. He would go back, you know, but he never stood trial. He was 18 years old. That actually happened. My grandmother saw him get killed, saw Ed Cox get killed. But there's a legend to that story. Now, they say, I don't know how true it is, but there is a legend to that story. Supposedly, up there at the road, there was a 10-rail high fence. 10 rails high. Well, there was Paris White on a horse, and Smith Whitaker, they said, was riding a fast mule. Real fast mule. When Mac Austin shot Ed Cox off that horse, Smith immediately kicked that mule and headed toward the Stormy Gap, which was about 1.5 miles away. About that, maybe 2 miles. Let's say 2 miles. About 2 miles away to the Stormy Gap. Had that mule just to get it up the road. Well, Paris, for some reason, dismounted and screamed like a woman, and they said high hurdled that 10-rail fence in one jump. Shot up through what we call Lemon Field Hollow through the woods and got to Haddonfield, and my great-grandpa Noah Sayers was hoeing corn. Everybody's hoeing corn back in them days. Was hoeing corn and said all of a sudden a breeze come up. Pretty stiff breeze, said the trees started to sway. Said he looked up and Paris was going through the treetops. He said, Noah, he said, get out of here. He said, Mac Austin went crazy. He said, he's killed Ed Cox, he's killing everybody in sight. Run for your lives. He said, he just kept going through the treetops. Now remember, Smith Whitaker's on a fast mule heading toward the Stormy Gap. Well, when Smith got to the Stormy Gap, that little mule was all flecked with sweat and everything. He wore it out coming up through there in their parish. You know, he said, buddy, I've been waiting on you for the last 10 minutes. He said, where have you been? You know. Now, I don't know how true that is. That is the legend of the story. And you know, you can add fact, you know, you can decipher fact from fiction, okay? Thank you very much.
Hey, I'm Gary Varner. I'm number 2 on the schedule today. Hi, ladies. Can you all see well enough over here? I'm married to Tammy's sister. Timmy's sister, Peggy.
Donnie's sister.
And Donnie's sister. Yeah. And I've got a couple little stories I want to share with you today. I've written a book, and I think all of you all may well have a copy of it, but I do have some with me. And these are a couple of stories in the book. So if you've got the book and you've read the stories, I hope I changed it a little bit for you, make it a little more enjoyable. But you know, this is just about the time of the year when people start opening up their swimming pools, you know, and shocking them and getting them ready for the summer. Well, when I was growing up here in the pound, back in the 40s and 50s, all the kids went swimming in the creek, in the Pound River. As a matter of fact, it was a favorite spot up South Fork called Big Rock. Any of y'all been up to Big Rock? All right. Big Rock was in a turn of the South Fork Creek or river, and a little slight turn, and we kids would get up there in the summertime and we'd build us a dam out of the rocks that we'd pull out of the river. The slick rocks. If you've ever been on those rocks in the river up there, wow, man, you'd start walking along and all of a sudden you're falling down. But we built up a little dam across that river. And it did pretty good because it backed the water up to there's a couple of places that it was 4 or 5 feet deep. We could swim in there and have a great time. And this great old big rock was on the far side of the river, a great old big boulder. And I figured out years later, that's probably the reason we called that Big Rock. But you could get up on that rock. You could climb up on that rock. It wasn't too far off the water. And you could lay down and sunbathe, or you could dive off of that rock into the water, but you had to make a real shallow dive because you didn't have a whole lot of water in there. All of us kids were up there one Saturday. It was loaded with people swimming and having a good time, and all of a sudden somebody said, "Hey, they opened up a brand new swimming pool over in Jenkins, Kentucky. It's a great old big concrete swimming pool with treated water, and it has 2 diving boards. One of them's about 3 or 4 feet off the water, and the other one is 10 feet high." I had a real good friend when I was growing up called Rabbit, Robert Mullins. Lives out in Washington now. Still good friends. We talk on the phone frequently. But Rabbit and I just love to do things together. And we started talking after we heard this tale about the new swimming pool in Jenkins, Kentucky, and we're about 11 or 12 years old. We said, "Hey, we want to go swimming in that swimming pool over in Jenkins, Kentucky." But Jenkins, Kentucky was about 12 or 15 miles away. Now that was the old road. How many of you have been up the old road towards Jenkins, Kentucky? It's still there, and if you've not been up there, make that trip. Really and truly, it's worth it just to see all the twists and turns that people had to go through in order to get across that mountain. And the other side of the mountain, it was the same way on the Jenkins side of the mountain. By the way, did you know that's called Pine Mountain up there, but when I was growing up, that was a Pound Mountain. And the people in Jenkins, that was a Jenkins Mountain. But anyhow, Rabbit and I had never ridden well, the only means of transportation we really had was bicycles. We'd never ridden a bicycle that far before, much less up and down the mountain. So we talked about it and decided that, hey, what we can do is, the Clinchfield Railroad Company had come in just a couple of years prior to that and built a railroad into Pound. They built that railroad all the way across south of the mountain, And about halfway up that mountain, they cut this monstrous tunnel right through the spine of that mountain and laid that track right through that tunnel and down the mountain on the other side into Jenkins. Rabbit and I decided we don't have to ride our bicycles all the way over the mountain to Jenkins. We can ride our bicycles up to the tunnel and walk through the tunnel and come out the other side in Jenkins. 2 12-year-old boys, never been in a tunnel before, and had no idea at all where that swimming pool was located in Jenkins, Kentucky. Sometimes we were just too adventurous for our own good. But that very next Saturday morning, we met in front of the Jerky Cafe. Y'all know where the Jerky used to be? Up by the Roberts Brothers tire store right now, just at the mouth of South Fork. We met there at the Jerky and got on our bicycles and put our little swimming trunk over the handlebars, and we took off pedaling up the Horse Gap down toward the foot of the mountain. Got down to the foot of the mountain and started pedaling our way up that mountain. And it wasn't long that we were not pedaling anymore. We were off of our bicycles and pushing them. Every now and then you could get back on them and ride a little bit, but most of the time was spent pushing those bicycles up that mountain. And we finally got it up to the big deep curve, and off to the left is the railroad track. We stopped there and went over to the railroad track and started walking along that railroad track, and sure enough, just a few yards in front of us was the mouth of that big tunnel. We put our bicycles over in the weeds off to the side, got into between the tracks, and started walking into that tunnel. And it got a little dark. And we kept going. The tunnel was built with a little curve in it. We always said it was about a mile long. I really don't know how long it is, but it has a curve in it so you can't see the light at the other end of the tunnel. So we were walking through there, and all of a sudden it started getting darker and darker and darker. There was no light coming in from the other end, and we were in that turn, and there was no light coming in behind us. I think it was about that time that Rabbit said, "Gary, what are we going to do if the train comes while we're in here?" We didn't have to worry about that. About 10 or 15 minutes later, we came out the Jenkins side of that tunnel into the daylight, and we stood there and looked down the side of that mountain, and that is some steep mountain. And we looked down and you could see Jenkins down in there, and we decided to blaze a trail right down that mountain and go into Jenkins and ask somebody where the swimming pool was. So we started down that mountain holding on to trees and everything else, and I'm sure we scooted along a lot as we were heading down through there. Lo and behold, when we got to the foot of the mountain and broke out of the woods, just about 100 yards up in front of us on the left was the Jenkins swimming pool. Ah, goodness gracious. We went up there to that swimming pool and we paid our dime or whatever it cost us to go in. They gave us this little metal basket. Went into the changing room and changed our clothes and put on our swimming trunks. Came back out to that swimming pool and just jumped into that water. And man, it was a great old big concrete swimming pool. Treated water, and we were just in there swimming and having us a great old time. And on the far end, on the deep end of that swimming pool, we looked, and sure enough, there was a little diving board just a few feet off of the water. And then there was that big, giant diving board, 10 feet high. Rabbit and I took off, and we got out of the water and went around to that little short swimming pool, diving board. And we got over there, and a lot of kids were jumping and diving off of that diving board. So we waited our turn, and we watched the other kids, because we'd never dove off of a diving board before. We didn't know what to do. We watched the other kids, and you could watch them, and they would go out on the diving board, and they'd get out to the end of it, and they'd stand on the end, and they'd start bouncing up and down. And then they'd either jump or they'd dive into the swimming pool. So Rabbit and I figured out that's the way we got to do it. So we got up there on that diving board, and walked out, got on the end. Now, we've been diving off a big rock. We know what to do. So we're out there bouncing on that diving board, and we go and dive into that water. But you know, you don't have to make a shallow dive there. So we ended up doing a whole lot of belly flopping until we learned how to dive down into the water. Well, needless to say, as the day went on, there was a challenge. Everything we did, there was a challenge and there was competition in everything that we did. And the challenge was, let's go to the top of that 10-foot diving board. So that's what we did. We went over and we climbed up that ladder. And up at the top of the diving board, there was a little staging area where 4 or 5 people could stand around while somebody was diving off. And we watched people dive off of that diving board that day. A lot of people we saw jump off too. And we were standing there looking and watching, and some people would go out there and they'd stand on the end and they'd bounce and they'd dive or they'd jump. And there was some of those guys, they were really great divers. They would stand back there in the back and on their little swimming trunk, and they'd go, whoop, 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 whoop. And oh my God, some of those guys could dive up there and do a swan dive. They could do a jackknife and hit that water. It was fabulous watching those people dive. But it was our turn. I wasn't going to run out there and jump. I walked out to the end of that diving board, and I stood at the end. Have you ever stood on a 10-foot diving board and looked down at that water? Oh my gosh, it's a long way down there. But we stood there, and there was no bouncing. It was just a jump. And that's what we did most of the day. We'd jump off of that diving board. Eventually, over the summer, we got enough confidence up that we started diving off of the diving board. But we spent the day diving and swimming and playing and flirting with the girls. We had a great time. And all of a sudden, it was about 6 o'clock. Time for us to leave. Time for us to get back home. Nobody really knew where we were anyhow. I'm running out. So out we go. We go in, get our pants, put our pants on, get our wet swimming trunks, and head back up that mountain. We get over to the foot of the mountain and start going up, and it's steep going down. It's 10 times steeper going up. We had to get a hold of saplings and branches, the low-lying branches of trees to pull us up. But we finally got all the way back up to the mouth of the tunnel. We sat down on the railroad track. Took us a little break. You know, as a young kid, a break is just a minute or two, and then you got to get up and go. When you hit my age, a break's about 30 or 45 minutes before you can get up and go. But anyhow, we got up and we started heading back into the tunnel. Challenge. Let's see who can walk the rail the farthest without falling off. So here we go, walking those little rails into the tunnel. And I don't know who won, but we worked our way into the tunnel, and it started getting a little dark, so we quit that and got into the center in between the tracks and started walking on farther into the tunnel. It kept getting darker and darker, and we finally got into that point where it was starting to turn, and it was pitch dark. And all of a sudden, we heard this strange roaring noise. What is that? And we looked, and we noticed that noise kept getting louder and louder. And we looked to the far end of the tunnel, and all of a sudden you could see little flecks of light bouncing off of the wet walls and the wet rocks in the ceiling of that tunnel. And we realized then that was a train coming into the tunnel from the pound side. We knew we didn't have time to turn around and run back out of that tunnel. So we just went over to the side of the tunnel and got up against one of the big support columns that they had there, leaned up against the wall, which was soaking wet with rocks, and stood there and watched as that train rounded that curve, and we could see the headlights shining down that track. And back then, that train was one of the old coal-fired steam engine trains that belched out that old black smoke, and steam would hiss out the sides. And that train was getting closer and closer to us. So we grabbed the swimming trunks and just held them over our face and stood there and endured the thunderous sound of that train roaring by us, scared to death. It was probably a couple of minutes before the train finally made it by us. As it was leaving, it was sucking the smoke out, most of the smoke out of the tunnel. Rabbit and I got back up into the center of those railroad tracks and started walking a little faster, I'm sure. As we walked on out the far side of the tunnel, got on our bicycles and pushed them over the road, and got on them and started riding them down that lower part of the mountain. A few curves and twists and turns, but that was really a fun ride. And one of us said to the other, hey, someday we need to take our bicycles all the way to the top of Pound Mountain and ride them down. The challenge. Rabbit and I made that trip to to Jenkins through the tunnel many times during that summer. But we had learned a little trick going to the movies over here at the Pound Theater on Saturday afternoon, the Cowboys and Indians Western movies. Every time before we would go into the tunnel, whether it was from the Pound side or the Jenkins side, we'd lay down beside that track and put our ear on the rail and listen for the train to come. Now, I don't know if that really worked or not, but we never got caught in that tunnel again. Thank you. I didn't know I was going to get this dry. Okay. Charles, I keep missing you sitting over there, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm trying to stay with Ernie here. Anyhow, I told you as Rabbit and I came out of the tunnel, we got on our bikes and rode them down the lower part of the mountain and decided that, hey, we were going to take them up to the top of the mountain someday and ride them down. Well, one Saturday morning, not long after that, I guess, again, we were down at the Jerky, standing around, trying to decide what adventure we were going to do that Saturday. We had a lot of them. We may go up in the mountains and play fox and hound, or we may go hunting. We may go up to Big Rock and go swimming. We may go thumbing. We may go back to Jenkins and swimming. But today, we're going to take our bicycles to the top of Pound Mountain and ride them down. We get on our bikes, and sure enough, we head up Horse Gap, head back down to the foot of the mountain, start up that mountain, riding some, walking a lot. We get up to the tunnel. We look at each other and say, you know, it's pretty tiring right now. Let's turn around and ride back down. That's a good ride back down. But no, the challenge had been made. We're going to the top of the mountain. So we continue to get on our bikes every now and then. You can pedal a little bit and ride. Again, most of the time was spent pushing. And again, if you've never been up that road, you need to go up that road to see what these two young 12-year-old boys endured going up that mountain. We finally made it to the top of the mountain. And we look back down at the hills and valleys around town. Absolutely beautiful. If you've not been up to Pound Gap, to the top of the mountain, and stopped long enough to look back down at this area toward the Pound, make sure you do it. It is absolutely beautiful. Anyhow, Rabbit and I got up there and we sat down, took that little break again, and then we decided we better check our bicycles out if we're going to ride them down that mountain. So we went over and got down and checked the tires. Tires are okay. Push on that brake. Brake's okay. That's about all you can check on a bike. So we got on our bikes and we started to head down the mountain. And all of a sudden one of us said, hey, you know, there's a lot of traffic on Route 23, and that was it. That was the main north-south route back then, Route 23. There's a lot of traffic on this road, so we need to be careful going down this mountain. Let's go slow. Hey, that's a good plan. So we're on our bicycles and we start heading down the mountain, going slow. And all of a sudden we go around this one little curve, and then we hit a little straight stretch. Rabbit starts getting out in front of me. I'm going slow, man. He gets out about 20 or 30 yards in front of me, and I think, well, he's going too fast. I've got to catch up with him. So I let off my brake. A dumb mistake. And I start picking up a little speed to catch up with Rabbit. And all of a sudden, Rabbit goes around this curve to the right, and I lose him. So I head up toward that curve, and I think, oh man, this is a steep curve. So I hit the brakes of my bicycle again, and I get on the inside of the road and get over there, and as I start turning that bicycle, I start leaning that bicycle as far as I can lean it in order to make that curve on the inside without going over to the other side of the road. And I made it around that curve, but I was really sweating it there for a while. And when I got around that curve, there was another curve that would switch back over to the left, and I couldn't see Rabbit, so I knew that he was way out in front of me, and I had to let off the brake in order to catch up with Rabbit. And I hit that next curve, and I went on the inside of that one, and I leaned that bicycle as far as I could lean it without it sliding out from under me. As I went around that curve as fast as I could go, straightened up from that curve and took off, and on just a little while, there was another curve back to the right. I was picking up speed, I pushed that brake down and I held it, and it wouldn't slow that bicycle down. It just kept going fast as I approached that curve, and I was holding it down, and I started leaning that bicycle in as far as I could lean it. As I leaned it over and started into that curve, the bicycle kept pushing itself farther and farther out, and all of a sudden, it was on the other side of the road. And I looked up, and there was a car coming up the mountain on my side of the road now, blowing his horn as hard as he could blow. And I could look out and see him, and in just about 2 seconds before we were going to make impact, he swerved over to the other side of the road, blowing that horn as he whizzed by me. And I whizzed on down that mountain. Curve after curve I would hit, holding that brake as hard as I could hold it, until I finally was able to get around, worried to death that I was going to hit another car or a truck or something coming up that mountain. I did. I made it down to the tunnel area, and from there on I knew the area, the road down, so I knew I could ride it. But again, that brake wouldn't work. I kept going and kept going. I finally got down near the bottom of the road and the mountain, and I looked out ahead of me. There was Rabbit standing on the side of the road holding his bicycle. And I went up to where he was, and by then the bicycle started slowing down a little bit. And I stopped my bicycle, got off and looked over at Rabbit, and Rabbit looked at me and said, "Damn, that was some ride." Rabbit had the same problems I had. His brakes went out too. You know, we decided right then we were not going to ride down Pound Mountain again. Now that's a good plan. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Love that. I really don't, because to me, that's just like that's almost like having a rerun of Sanford and Son here in Rollo and Lamont. That's what it sounds like. So I don't know if I'm going to use this or not now and stuff. I just I kind of changed my mind a little bit. I came to talk tonight about a little bit with my family. Randy Jack Mullins. I don't know if anybody's heard of him. I know Margaret has, because Margaret and I are kin. But how many have heard of Andrew Jackson Mullins before? Okay. Randy Jack was my great-great-grandfather, and I am a direct line descendant from him. My dad, of course, his father, James Russell Mullins, and then it goes back to David A.J. and then to Brandy Jack. A lot of people don't know a lot about him. I know we didn't know too much about him for a long time. I just knew that he was, I guess at first, when I first heard about him, the first thing I heard about him was he was a counterfeiter. And then I heard that he was a pretty darn good counterfeiter. And then there were times that I heard that he got in trouble with the law, spent some time in prison. So I'm going to talk a little bit about him and just kind of share some things. Brandy Jack had a connection, of course, with his, I've got to look here and find out. I've got to put the glasses on because I'm old. Some of you may have heard of Booker Mullins. Have you heard of Booker Mullins before? Booker is buried up on Bo Camp, and that is that's Brandy Jack's great-grandfather, is who that is. And so Brandy Jack still has some kind of connection, or the Mullinses has some kind of connection at least, to the Pound, because pretty much like everybody else, they were all over the place, just like everyone else. They were all over the place, moved from different places, moved over to Kentucky. Brandy Jack was born there and came back. A couple of the stories, this might be interesting, might not be, it might scare you to death. Brandy Jack was married 4 times. Outlived all of his wives except for one. She outlived him by 30 years. He had as many as, what's the number, Kim? Is it 21 or 22 kids?
I thought it was 17 legal.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to figure that out. Now, I think altogether it was something like 21. I think it's about 21 kids. We don't know how many were born out of wedlock to other women, because there were other reported women out of it as well. But
Surely not.
yeah, surely yes, there were. I'm not going to deny that. But a lot of people have asked me before: is Brandy Jack connected to the Killing Rock? 2 ways, yes and no. I'll say that. He's not directly involved with Ira or any of those and all that happened up on the mountain that day, except for Wilson. And Royce brought Wilson up there at the beginning of it. Wilson was his nephew. Brandy Jack's brother was Marshall Bigfoot Mullins. And so when he was involved in this, at least Brandy Jack at least knew that the family was somehow involved with whatever had happened up on the Killing Rock. But we also had another connection, and it's through my other great-great-grandfather. And if you've ever heard of the name John Bentley, from over about Jenkins, or Elkhorn Creek as it was called at the time, John Vent was outside, pretty much similar to what Royce was telling about the story about with his, was it grandmother? Okay. But he was outside, he heard the shots go off on the mountain that day. He was, in essence, the sheriff or constable or whatever of Elkhorn Creek. And so after he heard the shots, he made his way up onto the mountain. And he's one of the first ones to describe how grisly the murder scene was when he got up there. He's the one that a lot of people wonder, what did it look like when he got up there? He described people, he described the family as their bowels were outside, they'd been shot, the holes. One woman, I think she'd been shot in the chest, had opened her up. But one of the things that he found out, though, by looking around as a lawman, he was going around and looking, and he found shell casings. And he picked them up, and he looked at them, and he said, this could only belong to two people that I know of. One of them, I can't remember the name, I can't remember that one name, but the other was Bad Henry Adams. And the reason why he knew that was because he had seen the guns that either Bad Henry Adams and this other man had had at one time, and so he knew what kind of ammunition that they shot. But John Vent probably lived about, I think about 2 or 3 more years after that. And he had a daughter who actually married Brandy Jack's son, David A.J. Mullins. And of course they had children. My grandfather came out of that. Brandy Jack died in around 1913, 1917 in that general area. But the things that Brandy Jack was involved in is what I've got to tell you about. Prior to all of this stuff happening at Killing Rock, Brandy Jack was involved in counterfeiting. And Brandy Jack was known for having money that was supposedly better than the government's. Now, you ask how that happened. They assayed his money one time, what he had made, and found out that he put more silver into his money than the government did. That's how they caught him. Now, since then, the story that has been relayed around, there's always been the question too about whether or not Brandy Jack, where did he get his silver from? And that's always been a big question. And there are a lot of people that believe that Swift Silver Mine is over here in Pine Mountain somewhere. That's one belief. There's one story, of course, that it runs down toward the Breaks, that there's been people that said that it exists down there. But for short, we really don't know where Brandy Jack got his silver from. There were stories that there was a woman who came into town, she wore a black shroud, rode in on a horse and brought satchels of silver in. And whether he got some, I don't know how it was. He also was using baker's silver, and that was from the dentist. They found out about that from dentists over in Abingdon. And they actually, him and Counterfeit Saul and some of them, bought some of that baker's silver to be able to make their money with. Kind of weird though. Counterfeit Saul, Brandy Jack, and Creed Short. You've ever heard of the name Creed Short before? They were 3 of the most, or at least what they considered to be the best counterfeiters that existed at the time. Counterfeit Saul, though, and Brandy Jack did not get along too well, even though they were kin. Counterfeit Saul accused Brandy Jack of making queer money. That's the way it was deemed. He said it was not worth anything that was put together or what it was put together with, and he had to give it away to his women up on the ridge and everything else just to get rid of it because nobody would take it in the town. That was a lot of it. Creed Short comes into this because he was one of the grandchildren of Brandy Jack, and Creed got into counterfeiting. Creed served some time in federal penitentiary. Creed and another man at one time just about bankrupt Klitschko and McClure with W.M. Ritter Lumber Company. And what they did was they didn't make silver coins or anything. They had scrip, and they counterfeited scrip, and it just about bankrupted Klitschko at the time. Okay? So now where does Brandy Jack come into this? Because Brandy Jack did serve some jail time. Brandy Jack was doing this counterfeiting sort of thing, and supposedly, I was told here about a year or two ago that not only did he get his silver from the baker's silver and things like that, but he was a little bit of a shrewd person. He'd go into somebody's house, if he knew they had silverware, he'd sneak a piece of it off the table and slide it into his pocket And he'd take a few more, and then he'd take it and he'd melt it down. And then he'd take it back to his house on Alley's Creek, which is up about the Crane's Nest, and that's where he would go and he would make everything. But Brandy Jack got caught by a U.S. Marshal one time, and his name was Lark Seltzer. And coincidentally, there is another Killing Rock around here. We know the Killing Rock up here at Pound Gap. There's a Killing Rock over at Flatwoods as you go between Coburn and going over toward Dungannon. Lark Seltzer was killed over there. Well, to go back a little bit, Brandy Jack was tried, convicted in Abingdon, and he was sent off to the penitentiary. And the penitentiary where he was sent to was in Albany, New York. Now, a lot of people would say, why in the world was he sent to Albany? Well, at the time, there was either stories that I'd come across that he'd either been sent to Raleigh, and then I found out that there was no federal penitentiary in Raleigh. And about a year ago, I was doing some research and I found out, yes, there was a penitentiary in Albany, New York, but it wasn't a federal penitentiary. There were no such things as federal penitentiaries back in the time when Brandy Jack was caught for making his money. Albany had went and constructed this prison that looked like something out of Camelot. Big, looked like a castle and everything else. It doesn't exist today. It's been torn down. But Brandy Jack was sent up there along with all the other Confederates and all the other undesirables from the South that nobody in the South wanted to deal with at the time because they didn't want to make enemies toward anybody. So what did they think they could do? Send them up north, and the North would go, and some of the men up there at the North said, well, we'll straighten these bunch of country bumpkins out is what we'll do. And so they got him up there. Brandy Jack was taken in there for 7 years. While he was there, he was mistreated. He wrote home and told his wife at the time, well, actually, before he left, he gave her $15 and told her, he said, take care of the kids, take care of everything, what you need to. But when he went to prison, he had wrote her back and he told her, he said, the food up here is not fit for a dog to eat, or matter of fact, it's not fit for a maggot. They would serve him food that was maggot infested. And he watched his cousin / nephew, I don't know exactly how it was defined at the time, but I think they referred to him as a nephew. He watched his nephew be drowned in front of him because they were trying to go and they were trying to get the information out of him as to who the counterfeiting ring was that was putting together all this money. And he watched him be drowned. And he didn't say anything. He just kind of went on and he just kind of did what he had to do. Lark Seltzer, in the meantime, was killed. And the warden came up and slapped him on the back one day in the prison yard, and he said, Mullins, he says, Seltzer's being killed. He says, what do you got to say about that? He says, well, I can declare one man that's clear out of that, and that's me. He said, because I wasn't there. But don't think it didn't cross my mind that I'd like to have done it at one time or another. But Brandy Jack eventually, after time, he got out of prison. He came back home, and came back and his wife, and he did ask, this is the story that was told too. This was the story that he said that, how much money do you have left over? Well, the first thing everybody kind of wonders is, well, how much money did he have left over, or did she have left over? She said, I have $7.50 left. And this was over 7 years. And he was quite pleased that she had $7.50 left, because you just start wondering, did they live off the land? How did they do these things? But she took care of that. So after he got back home, some land opened up on Caney Ridge. The government came back and they wanted to talk to him a little bit more, and they wanted him to, set up a distillery. So he moved from counterfeiting and he went to making moonshine, whiskey is what he made. And he was known for making some of the best apple mash whiskey, or at least what they called it, apple whiskey, in these parts. But another funny story goes with that too. Brandy Jack was, how can I say this, suspicious that somebody was getting into his mash. At the end of all the orchards and stuff, or the rows and the trees and everything, he had these big barrels that were sitting out the end of the trees. And they would go and they'd bring the apples down there and so forth. And what they were doing, they was taking it, letting the apples kind of break down, putting the mash there and everything to kind of sit. And he had noticed something was getting into his mash, and he couldn't figure out what, but he said, I'm going to track it down and I'm going to find out what it is. So one night he decided to kind of lay low, and he decided he was going to go and he was going to track whoever it might be. So he went down there and he found the barrel had been turned over. These big scoops of mash or whatever it was down there in the barrels had been scooped out of there. And he didn't have any idea where he was going to go. Well, then it started snowing. And then the snow fell, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And then about that time, Randy Jack started detecting some tracks. And the tracks started out, but these weren't human tracks. These were bear tracks. And the bear tracks started out pretty normal at first. Then they started going this way. And then they started going back this way. And he followed it over to where he got over to where there was a sinkhole. And there was a big pole over the sinkhole, and he was at least lucky enough he could cast enough light over. And here's this bear on its back. And the bear is just doing this, kicking all four legs up in the air, and it just, you know, it doesn't know what's going on. So Randy Jack, the only thing he has on him is a hatchet. And he goes up, he takes the hatchet, makes one cut, makes another cut, kills the bear, chops the head off. He came back home, he had the bear head with him, and somebody asked him, said, weren't you even scared? He said, I wasn't worried about it. The bear didn't know what was going on, so it wasn't going to hurt anything. So he killed the bear out of that. But, you know, eventually what ended up happening, Randy Jack, he later died about the age of 93. Ended up, he set up gangrene. He was crossing over a barbed wire fence. Either got part of it hung, I think, in his leg or his foot or something as he was crossing over. Set up gangrene, it killed him. But Randy Jack had some famous children that kind of came out of the bunch as well. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Noah Mullins. Noah was one of his children. And Noah was about as sneaking, dirty as anybody would ever be in his life. And he would go over to Jenkins, and they had a tent revival over at Jenkins one time. And Noah was just as mean as, he was into counterfeiting with Creed at one time. He was bad to drink. And he went over to a tent revival in Jenkins one night. And he suddenly just got the urge. He just shot up to the front, went up, and threw his arms up in there, and he says, I give myself to you, O Lord. Is pretty much what he said. Well, everybody was just going to pieces. They were crying. They were just tore all to pieces over it. How could Noah, who was one of the worst people in the world, how in the world would he just suddenly get religion like this? Well, they didn't really say too much about it. They came back the next night. Noah was right back again. He was there on the front row, or he was there pretty close. He stood up and he said, I've been called to preach. So, you know, they were like, okay. So he got up and he preached. He got up and preached, and as one saying, I've heard Jerry Clower say it before, you know, he shelled the corn right down to the cob and stuff is what he did when he told the message. Well, he got done, and somebody stood up and somebody said, I think we ought to give this brother a little bit of an offering. You know, if he's done such a good job. So they passed the plate around. He got the money out of it. Probably about, I'd say an hour, a couple hours later or something, somebody was walking downtown in Jenkins, of all places. They were down in Jenkins, and they looked in, and there's Noah sitting at the bar. And somebody walked in, and somebody said to Noah, and I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, they said, what in the world are you doing? I said, you went and said, here you are, and you confessed, you gave yourself and everything, and then you got up and you preached and told how bad drinking and all these other things were, and you're in here drinking. What are you doing? And he was out of his mind anyway. He'd already been drinking so much. I think the first thing he said, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. So, but Noah was pretty bad in some other things. He and Randy Jack, supposedly, according to one of Noah's grandchildren, Lois Wright Tweedy, she says that Randy Jack and Noah did kill someone. We don't know who, but they did kill somebody up on a mountain somewhere. The body was found probably some years later after he'd already decayed the bones, but no one ever knew. And you didn't tell those things back then, and none of this stuff ever came out. And I already mentioned that Brandy Jack was known for having a lot of women and children. How many of you ever heard of the term woods colting before? You ever heard of the word woods colting? That means when you're pretty popular and you're just around the town a lot, and that's what Brandy Jack was. That's at least one of his grandchildren referred to him as he was pretty bad as a woods coulter or something is what she called it. But other than that, besides Noah, I think I'll probably close it out with this one, is George Washington Mullins. Wash was his name. And Wash was one of the last children out of the first set of the family, out of the Mullins family. And he was the last child born when David A.J. and I think this is, Margaret, help me here on the name because I'm forgetting the first wife. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I've got it in my notes, but I can tell you. But she died in childbirth as she was giving birth to George Washington. And Wash had a real thing for going and having a smart mouth about things. He could go and he could fight with some of the best of you verbally. He would tell my great-grandmother, Rhoda Bentley, who was John Vent's daughter, she said to him one time, she said, Wash, she said, how's your eyesight? He said, I can see a good-looking woman coming from a mile away. But Uncle Wash also was known for being Santa Claus over at Clintwood. And Wash would go, it's sort of like what the Salvation Army does, and have their pot there, and he'd stand there and ring the bell and everything, but he'd be dressed in a Santa Claus outfit. And I think this was about in the early 40s, and my dad knew nothing about this until we found a story in the Dickinson Star about Wash being on the side of the street, and he would take the money. We don't know if he took it himself, but he said he was giving it to children and so forth. But during the summer, I think in the early 40s, Wash dies. He has a heart attack and he dies. And the newspaper at the time in Clintwood, I'm thinking it was the Dickinsonian at the time, they had to stop the paper from going out the next day because the headline said Santa Claus is dead. And they had to stop because they said, we'll tear all these kids all into pieces if they see this, because they're going to relate that George Washington was Santa Claus. No, we can't do that. So they pulled the headline and everything. But if you saw a picture of Wash, he had a beard. He looked like Santa. Looked almost like the Coca-Cola version of Santa with the beard and everything, just minus the outfit. But I will tell you, though, as I get ready to close about things, we were talking about the Bowlings coming in here just a little bit, and about the Mullinses and the Bowlings. I found out about a year ago that here supposedly we're connected to Pocahontas. You go back to Pocahontas and things about the Bowlings and so forth. And we've got into all this different stuff. My dad finally, at the age of 89, decided for his birthday, after being coached a little bit, to have his DNA tested. And when he had his DNA tested, we found out some really remarkable things about the family. One, we found out that there is really no Native American connection in there. There's nothing about American Indian. We found out that we were kin to people we've never heard of before. I mean, when Ancestry sends you this information and it comes across and says, we've made a match. Well, you look on there and you look, I don't even bother to tell Dad, because Dad's like, I don't want to know. I just don't want to know about this. But we'll have these strange surnames that just show up out of nowhere, but they're connected so far back. But, Royce was talking about being 23 and being able to get all this information and finding all these tales and stuff. If you don't have the opportunity to do it right now, the best way to probably try to do some research is get your DNA tested. I'm just going to tell you that. If you've not had it done, it solves a lot of problems. It does open up a lot more problems too on some things, but it does make a difference because it is doing that, and convincing my dad to do that was an accomplishment in itself, because this is a man who thought that you kind of go like lab work and you go and take a cup and go into the bathroom. That's what he thought that you did with DNA until we told him, no, you have to spit into a little tube and everything. But I think probably the biggest accomplishment out of it, of going back and tracing the Mullins family and so forth about Brandy Jack and his connections, even though this is not related, my dad found out, at least he was able to find out, he and his sister, who are the only two Mullins children left of James Russell and Delphi Mullins, Delphi Ratliff Mullins, my dad found out who his grandfather was. And for years, for as long as my dad has been alive, he just knew that there was someone out there, but he didn't know who it was. And then we found out through DNA testing that, yep, it was exactly who we thought it was. It was there listed on I think it was on a census report back from about 1900 is what it was, and it showed up. So that's about it. That's about all I've got to say.
Was that prison that he was at, was that Moundsville?
Which one?
Moundsville? Next to Queen, or you know? Oh, that was a pretty notorious prison up there.
No, this was in Albany, New York.
Oh,
Where it was, Albany, New York. Yeah, I know what you're talking about with Moundsville, because Moundsville had a really bad prison and stuff. But now the Albany prison was just, they wanted all the Southerners. That's what they did. And when Brandy Jack was up there, Brandy Jack still had to pay $250 on top of his 7-year sentence when they sent him off to Albany. So, you start thinking about this thing about the Baker Silver, Swift Silver mine. And matter of fact, there's one little thing, and I'm kind of doing a little plug for this too. Tales of the Cumberlands is coming up in August. And if you've never heard of Tales of the Cumberlands, you're invited to go to it. It's down at the Breaks Interstate Park, and it'll run for about 2 or 3 days. And this year, I've kind of been put in kind of charge of doing some of the program and trying to line some people up. We've got something, it's a professor from Virginia Tech, it's going to be coming in. And he's a retired chemist or chemistry professor at Tech. And he's also a historian after he retired. And he's got a connection about the conquistadors in Saltville and the Spanish involvement in this area back, way before we really thought that there was anybody settled here. And so if there was any kind of belief that Swift Silver Mine did exist, it's not a mine, because there's no way that this land around here would even have something like that. My belief is probably there's some Spanish coins, something that were put back in these mountains somewhere that had either been traded through the Indians or the Spanish or whatever, and had been forgotten about until somebody come across them, and then they started using them and either melting them down, putting them together, restamping them, however they did that. So, but I'm finished. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight, especially our speakers. Tomorrow afternoon, 6 o'clock, we have the movie documentary, Bill John Wright, His Life and Times. So we invite everybody else tomorrow out for the movie. We got there gospel singing, we got something more than every day this week. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up tonight. Thanks.